Yeah. In 2017, to be very, very precise, His Excellency Governor Samuel Otom, in his wise wisdom, chose to tread where others could not tread. He went ahead to put in place a law, the Open Grazing Prohibition and Establishment Law. We want to find out from you this morning, as the person who is presiding over this.
Thank you, viewers and listeners. Just like you rightly underscored, the Open Grazing Prohibition Law, or B, stands at the flagship of Governor Tom's administration, particularly in the area of agricultural revolution. And in his wisdom, he had seen reason to, at that time, thread where most leaders in Nigeria had thought otherwise. Some felt it was a very audacious project, so to say. But looking back, with the benefit of hindsight, we say without missing word that today history and the circumstances have vindicated His Excellency Governor Samuel Otom. Much of not less than a third of the governors in Nigeria have keyed into the program, have enacted the law within their states, and still counting, and that forms the basis for agricultural stable regulation in most states in the country. It is also good, it will be necessary to add that the main thrust behind Governor Otom's decision was to institutionalize universal best practices, in livestock and, or rather, the farmer header, management. It wasn't targeted at any specific or directly any particular set of people. The law is very explicit and open for everybody to access. Before the law was in place, there was routine consultation with all stakeholders across board. The State House of Assembly had public hearing where farmers and headers and the managers of agro and cattle businesses were called in. Advocates were all invited, and their input at this public hearing gave birth to the open grazing law. It is also important to add that Governor Otom did not just stop at that. Between 2017 rather, I beg your pardon, and 2022, the law has been amended, and that is particularly to give the desired bite to the law. It is good to add that laws are made for man and not the other way around. Man is not made for law. So the essence of law is to keep man and society in check, is to appropriate sanctions, where it is necessary, and serve as a deterrent, for would-be erring, members of the society. So 5 years along the line from where we started the law, there was the need, given the widespread acclaim and support for the law, which also again was hard deterrent, as well. There was the need to add bite, to amend the law to specifically specify punitive measures, in consonance with the economic dictates of the time. So the law, in its essence, is timely. The law is important. The law is necessary, and no doubt, the federal government, not just the state, and it's a recommendation for all leaders and men of thought who see the need to enforce universal best practices in the management of agro, livestock, and all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you just said something about why the governor chose to do this is to institutionalize best practices.
Yes.
Can you tell us the impact so far? Can you just, because we want to know.
Beautiful. All over the world, there is always a contention for space, between man, and cattle. And so naturally, in developed climes, herds of cattle and the rest are kept in ranches, quartered in areas where they receive direct attention and human impact from their own nutritional services to medical or veterinary services, as the case may be. So, comparatively speaking, areas where breeds of herds and cows are quartered in a particular environment and taken good care of, the economies of scale even favor more for such group of cattle because they are fattened, they are developed, and they have better market price comparatively. That is one. Two, there is direct attention to them, looking at their nutritional value from what they consume, the kind of grass they consume, or hay, as the case may be, they will consume, and then there is direct veterinary or medical attention, for these cows, as against those that are left to wander through long spans of distances, which it is energy sapping on the cows and have direct impact on the quality, of the meat and the health of the cows itself. This is without delving into the other area, which is consequent upon the wandering. Now, when these cows wander, there is a tendency for them to encroach or trample on human spaces, and that leads to the conflicts we've had. And so there is always this best practice consensus that animals should be quartered in restricted areas. That doesn't necessarily have to do with just the nomadic or the herder, so to say. Even in traditional environment here, Benue State indigents are, the law, like I said earlier, is not discriminatory. So even in our villages, farmers who keep herds of cattle or sheep or goats, as the case may be, are advised to keep them within restricted areas. And you are warned that if for any reason your cattle or herds stray into human space to cause, destruction, then there should be sanctions and punitive measures. So when I talked about universal best practices, I was talking about what is exactly obtained all over the world. To add to that again, it is time that we migrate from the old nomadic practices, of moving with herds of cows in large numbers. These large numbers, even where they do not deliberately tend to graze, on particular farmlands, mere trampling, given their sheer number, destroys farmland, and that causes crisis. And where I was going, which is important to add also from a more enlightened and scientific point of view, is that the advent of climate and warming and the climate crisis has again reawakened humanity to the need for us to take herding business or cow business the rest as serious business. Why? Because of climatic changes, even in our sub-Saharan region here, you discover that two things are happening. One, the Lake Chad Basin, which is a major water body, that supplies the water tributaries within the sub-region, is drying at a very astronomical rate. 2/3 of the Lake Chad Basin is dried up. And consequent upon that is also the advancement and encroachment of the desert. Desertification, again, has taken place, which only leads to one thing, that there would be contest for space and water bodies. And so naturally, there is a tendency for the unenlightened and uneducated herders to begin to migrate along long spaces in search of grazing land and water bodies to keep. And this comes in conflict with arable farmers, across. This is an unavoidable, consequence that would only be mitigated if laws are put in place for herders to restrict their cows with the advantages, overwhelming advantages that accrue to, ranching of cows or keeping them in particular restricted areas at the case may be.
I think I have to come back again to that question, but quickly, let me ask about the farmers now. With the advent of this law, what would you want to tell us about the level of production? Has it been able to enhance the farmers' crops and production?
It is intended to be two-pronged. The law is intended to, one, enhance the farmers' production, and on the other hand, also encourage livestock business. These must be balanced. That is the primary intent of the law. But to answer your question directly, the government has not been able to enforce the law to its latter. Why? Because there are still these recalcitrant herders who still violate, who still travel, who still encroach on people's, farmlands, and this has not just stopped at encroachment. The consequences that come from it are the crises, the killings, the invasions, and the sacking of villagers and people from their ancestral farming homes, like it's being experienced in Benue. And so, government is doing its best to curtail this, but security is a responsibility that is not the preserve of state governments. You understand? And so it has to be a collaboration with the federal government, and to the best of assessments, the performance of the federal government of security agencies as it relates to mitigating this crisis has been has fallen short of expectations. No doubt about it. No wonder the state government had put in place the livestock guards who are working in collaboration with the agro rangers, which incidentally is a creation of the federal government through the Federal Ministry of Agric and Rural Development and the Ministries of Interior, which underscores the fact that the federal government itself appreciates the enormity of this crisis. You understand? And so, being that as it may, Benue State still, even in spite of the law, is still suffering, from the consequences of this farmer header crisis. I will tell you without mincing word that the entire Fadama belt, Benue Fadama belt, that stretches all the way from the banks of River Benue, River Kasinala, along the Kyenge axis into Kasinala, all the way to Buruku, Goma, Makudi, Gwe West, and down to Agatu. All these areas that form the Benue Fadama belt have been sacked, by herders. They have become constant flashpoints for farmer header crisis, because herders inadvertently migrate to these areas in violation of the law and basic human, tenets of understanding, and still encroach. And when there is resistance or rebuff from these farmers, then the consequences are the crisis we've been having. And this has led to killing of thousands of Benue State indigenes, killing of hundreds of security, personnel in the state, and sacking of over 2,000 villages with over hundreds of thousands internally displaced persons, being quartered in the IDPs around here. That also has economic impact, because a third of the governor's unbudgeted revenue, on plan, has to go into servicing these persons in IDP, which by all standards are Nigerians, and government has a responsibility, which means that other areas would suffer the adverse effect, of money that are meant for something that's being, so it's a huge responsibility on government, and for every opportunity, Benue State, Governor Samuel Tom have called on the federal government to assist the state in beefing up security to mitigate this crisis. 2, enforce the law, which is the only way out, And 3, appeal to Benue farmers to, as usual, remain peaceful, not to take the laws into their hand, even at the height of, provocations, to see how, with time, the state government is doing all within its capacity to see that we wade off this particular crisis, and Benue farmers can go back to their farms. Let me be quick to add also that, again, if 40% or more of our arable lands cannot be utilized by Benue farmers, then it means it directly has impact on food production and food security. Mind you, Benue State is not just producing for our own internal consumption. Benue State is rightly called the food basket of the nation, which means that 40% of the supply to that basket has been cut off. And so there is global food insecurity crisis, and Nigeria, directly sits on a time bomb if the federal government does not realize in good time that Nigeria has a responsibility to salvage the situation in Benue so that Nigeria will be better for it. And that is what Governor Udoh has seen early in good time enough and has stood up to the challenge, not minding whose ox is gone or even his life that has been put online, just to save Nigeria from this impending food crisis.
Well, again, you just said something about the agro rangers and the livestock guards from the states. Yeah. Are you suspecting a conflict of leadership between these two groups? Then secondly, you mentioned the issue of the IDPs. What is the current state, the position of the IDPs in the state today?
To the first question, no, to the best of my knowledge, there had existed, since I resumed office, like I said, a very harmonious relationship between the ministry, the agro rangers, and the livestock guard, all of which are guarded by the enabling laws, to operate. The agro rangers have a responsibility to service both the agrarian farmers and the herders. Mind you, part of the crisis that the herders also have is not just farmers, weeding them off. Herders themselves have faced the problem of cattle rustling. So in most cases, they also depend on the state government security apparatus, as the case may be, and even and by extension the federal government, security institutions to intervene. So Governor Udoh's responsibility does not only rest with the agrarian Benue farmers, but more also for indigenous cattle herders and the nomadic herders that migrate into Benue State.
The IDPs.
Well, for the IDPs, what was the
state? What's the condition of the IDPs now in Benue State? Are they still in the camps or?
IDPs are still in camps. It's a huge challenge. I know the passion which His Excellency Governor Samuel Udoh has, shown for the predicament of these indigents, of the state. His own primary concern is that the enabling environment, security environment, should be created and put in place so that these persons who live in IDP camps, in shanty, environments, would be relocated back to their ancestral home to resume their normal life. But that also comes first with putting in place security, and reassurance, and reorientation. And security, like I said earlier, is the exclusive control preserve of the federal government. So there is a constant reminder and interface between Governor Tom and the federal government to see how the enabling security environment, one, will be created to relocate these farmers back to their, the internally displaced persons back to their ancestral home. That is primary. Secondly, most of these people were sacked, their homes destroyed, farmlands burnt. And so relocation also means creation of basic infrastructure in these areas. That again comes with huge economic, commitment. At a time when the state government is suffering, to measure and curtail its overhand, responsibility, it becomes an added responsibility for the state to do that. Government, through a partnership with international and donor organizations, had seen to the basic welfare and health needs of these internally displaced persons, but nothing can be as consoling and soothing as relocating them, back to the ancestral home, which has been the biggest headache for Governor Samuel Tom. It's a part of responsibilities he feels and hopes to complete, before the expiration of his tenure.
Yeah, I want to take you again on the livestock guides. There's a news that's going around about them crossing the red line. That is, doing what the ought not to have been doing. I want you to comment on that. Then the issue of training and retraining. Have you in any way taken a step of, going into training of these lifeguards guides?
Yeah, like I had said earlier, the livestock guard is put in place by enabling laws. That is standard, it's established. Secondly, the operations of the livestock guard are in consonance with security agencies in the state, and particularly the agro, rangers. It may be basic human concerns that people, probably by lack of basic understanding, training, orientation, and knowledge, may, wander beyond acceptable norms. But there are hardly reported, cases, of consistent violation of established norms by these livestock, guards to constitute nuisance within, the expected operational norms. That is not to say that there won't be one or two flashes of persons acting in ways that fall shorter than expectation. But to put it in very straight terms, I know that since I've been in office, there has been a very cordial relationship between the livestock guards, the agro rangers, the general civil defense body, and other military agencies operating within the state. And the whole intention is to check and maintain, or rather supervise them and see that they work within the ambits of the law.
The training and retraining.
On training and retraining, as I speak with you, I'm in discussion with Excellency. A memo is in place, right, to see how there would be training and capacity building for these livestock guards, because the basic experience they need is an understanding, one, of the law itself, two, an understanding of basic human relations, because the intention of the law is to, as much as possible, avoid crisis and conflicts, and so persons who are frontline managers of this law must be routinely educated, enlightened, sensitized, and equipped with basic communication skills to enhance their relationship with the herders on the one hand, and even the agrarian farmers on the other hand, and see that there is harmony, in their operation. So in a very short while, I know that with the approval of His Excellency, the Governor of Benue State, there would be, basic training and retraining programs between the involving the livestock guards, the agro rangers, basic security, operatives in the state, to sensitize them on basic communication skills and nothing more than that.
Okay, two questions as a go. Since this law was put in place by His Excellency, do you think it has bettered the life of the people of Benue State, or has done more harm? Because lately, or I think last week, there were some killings here, and I think in Goma. So what will you want to tell the people of Benue State about the law? Then what does the future hold for this law?
The law was primarily put in place to check and mitigate the excesses that came as a result of this farmer headache, crisis that has a history that predates the law. So the law was primarily put in place to mitigate, or rather check, this crisis. So it is important to acknowledge the fact that Governor Udoh, in his wisdom, through the instrument of the Benue State House of Assembly, had put that law in place to serve as a mitigation, or even as a deterrent, or even as a check, to curtail the excesses, that were abound in the conflicts between indigenous agrarian farmers and migrant, headers. So the law has done pretty well. A lot of law-abiding cattle headers operating within the state have kept their cattle within confined environments. The state government is aware of that, and the state government is collaborating through the Ministry of Agriculture and the Veterinary Service, department, to create a synergy and very harmonious relationship. The persons who go in violation of the law, like I said, are the recalcitrant migrant headers who come in to force themselves to migrate, across these routes in search for green pasture, and the rest. So, if for anything, the law has put a check. God forbid, if that law was not in Benue State, and Governor Tom has not shown, resilience and capacity to stand, in defense for the rights of the people of Benue State, I know that Benue State would have been overrun and sacked about now. So it's an opportunity to tell the people of Benue, and even migrant headers to Benue, that the law is for them and for all of us. It's unfortunate that in spite of the law, like there would always be persons who act in violation of basic law tenets, we still have headers who migrate into our into Benue land space and destroy, in this case, not just farmlands, sack, villages, and cause destruction and havoc, mayhem, as the case may be. There have been instances of attacks on Benue, communities, villages. This is primarily to break the resolve of the governor and the Benue, people in the enforcement of the law, because there are persons who are not comfortable with the law. And in the 21st century, we can't be acting, like people who are, in caves, acting outside the law. So the resolve of His Excellency, the Governor of Benue State, to enforce this law in the state, has one led to the consistent attack. In some cases, people are beginning to wonder whether there are more ulterior motives to it than basic, grazing land, because the level of sophistication, of the so-called, header, this thing. gangs and militia that come into the state, leaves one wondering how they have been able to penetrate, security checks. There have been instances and indications of even foreigners, being involved in compromising the security of our land. And that is why at every point in time, His Excellency, the governor, is crying out to the federal government and the security agencies particularly to wake up to their responsibility. More still needs to be done to save Benue farmers and to save Benue State as a state.
The future.
Yeah, thank you.
Finally, in a lighter mood, just a few days back we celebrated the Democracy Day. Can you just give us your assessment of His Excellency administration that will be winding up next year? How will you assess Governor Otom's administration?
Well, it would be right to argue that all governments under democratic dispensations are tenured, and they naturally come in to inherit baskets of problems, good, bad, the uglies, and the responsibility of every government is to try to sieve, all these challenges, so that at the end of the day, the dividends of democracy would and benefits would outweigh the negative aspects of governance, which must be there. And I think that has formed the main thrust of Governor Otom's administration in the last 7 years. If there's one thing that has been sustained, has been his ability to evolve people-oriented government policies, have direct relationship with the indigents of the state, because government must be felt to be seen to be meeting the needs of the people. And so the last 7 years, so to say, as we begin to wind up the administration, looking back, we can give a credible, assessment and say, yeah, the government has been able, to do well. Governments are continuing, and it's expected that after 8 years of his administration, another government, possibly a PDP government that comes into, Benue State, would take over from there and expectedly do more because we look at the areas where we fared well, where as human beings we must have lived below, this bar, and then excel on these areas. The last few months, especially in the agricultural sector, have been very proactive. I resumed office in January of this year, and between January and now, the last few months, Benue State has been able to connect itself to the national agricultural grid, to see how we can revolutionize agriculture in the state. As I speak with you, we had lost out on the African Development Bank's Special Agro Processing Zones program. It was curious why Benue State, the food basket of the nation, would lose out on that. But on assumption of office, I had the primary responsibility of hitting the ground running. And in the last few months, there have been robust interface between Benue State and the African Development Bank. On the one hand, the Ministry of Environment and Consultants, the Environmental Social Impact Assessment report has been put in place. The feasibility studies have been put in place. This involves money, and the governor has graciously, approved payments, for all these, monies to see. Also, in the next few days, later this week, we'll be having the review and appraisal visit in the state. I think between the 16th to 19th of this month, the Federal Ministry of Environment and partners from African Development Bank will be here, to give final assessment and tone. And it is worthy to assure the people of Benue State that Benue State will favorably be listed on the second tranche of that program, so that we'll have a special agro-processing zone with its attendant benefits and impact on the state. His Excellency Governor Samuel Ortom has also made funds available for the agro-climatic resilience in semi-arid landscape program. It's a program in partnership between the World Bank, the Federal Ministries of Environment, Water Resources, and Agriculture to particularly target the semi-arid areas to see how we can, mitigate soil degradation, to see how we can improve on the soil within this area and how we can boost, agricultural produce in these areas. And we've already made the financial and administrative commitment to this area. And I know that in the next few months, the direct benefits and impact of this. Not to forget to mention the livestock productivity resilience support project, which is called the LPRES. It's also a partnership between the federal government, Benue State, and other states to see with direct concern to see how we can improve the production of livestock, in the state and beyond. We've also had very robust partnership with the with USAID and the central bank. By tomorrow, Wednesday, the state should be launching the Agri-Credit Guarantee Scheme Fund. It's a partnership between the CBN, Benue State, USAID, where farmers, small scaleholder farmers, have been profiled over time. And I'll have the pleasure of the Benue State, His Excellency the Governor, to flag off this program tomorrow, where checks will be giving money to smallholder farmers to encourage their farming. Benue State has been able to also pay in the last few months since my resumption of its counterpart, fundings with guarantee from His Excellency the Governor to sustain this funding, so that through IFI will continue to improve on the value chain, development in the state, where smallholder farmers and cooperative farming cohorts are being given farm inputs from fertilizer to herbicides and others, and improved seedlings. Over 200,000 farmers across the state in the last few months have been profiled, and 2 weeks ago, last month, we had caused to launch that program, which was in partnership between IFA, the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, and the Benue State, government. And these inputs were distributed to farmers. It's an ongoing, process. You understand? So the expectation is that farmers would have access to improved seedlings, which the government has paid for. Farmers will have access to fertilizer, which through partnership. And finally, the government has also paid its billion naira counterpart funding in the NG Cares COVID program. It is a facility, again, that the World Bank and the federal government of Nigeria have put in place to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 season, directly on farmers. And the Ministry of Agri is also involved in that program through the FADAMA 3 Access program. On that also, what we're doing at the first phase of that program is to sensitize would-be beneficial communities and persons about the good intent, of this program. While we will do this, again, we'll be profiling the poorest of the poor. It is important to add at this point that there have been FADAMA 1 and 2. So persons, even before my coming into office, had hitherto been profiled. So these are the persons that would directly benefit. But what is worthy of note to add is also that the with changing environment and times, we're aware that some persons who were profiled 2 years ago probably would have been able to migrate from the status of the poorest of the poor through support and upliftment of government into comfortable sustenance levels. And won't be surprising to ever have people who probably were doing better, fall back into the poorest of the poor. So there's a need to update this list. And so my staff, in the Fadama 3 project are touring local governments as I speak with you and sensitizing the good people of Benue State as regards to the benefits that will accrue to this. Agriculture remains the main staple of Benue, with over 75% of our lands being farmable, arable lands. And again, over 75% of our rural, populace are employed in, agricultural ventures. So it is an assurance to the people of Benue State that His Excellency Governor Samuel Otom has put funds in place and is doing everything possible within its capacity to see that the agricultural, revolution continues in the state till the doorpost of, his exit. So Benue people are encouraged to go back to the farm. No wonder the governor has, in his wisdom, again added a day to the hitherto 1 day and has created 2 days for this farming season to give window of opportunity to even Benue civil servants who should see food security as first and foremost their basic source of concern and livelihood, to go back to the farmer. Not just a holiday window, but truly, he being the #1 farmer of the state, sees the need for every other Benue citizen to go back to the farm, create time to produce, one, basically to sustain the families, two, possibly store, for rainy days, and three, be able to create economy where possible to sustain our livelihoods.
Wow, it's really, really wonderful having you.
Thank you very much.
I strongly believe that would have loved to go on and on and on, but because of other engagement, I want to turn over to my colleague as a wrap-up.
Thank you so much, sir, for the privilege to have you shed light on the issue of the open grazing law using this platform. I want to thank you so much, and as also we go on, and also the reactions coming from our audience, we will still like to seek your audience to come back on and on again.
It will be my pleasure once again.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. God bless you.
Please, you have just joined this chat. It has been with the Commissioner for Agric and Natural Resources of Benue State, Honorable Kester Kyenge. He shed light on the issue of the controversial issue of open grazing in Benue State, and also the journey so far since he assumed office January this year as the Commissioner for this ministry, and also the journey of the Governor Samuel Otom, his giant strides in agriculture and in other areas too, with regards to the journey of Nigerian democracy so far. Thank you so much. For those of you who are trying to call, unfortunately, we do not provide facility for you to call. Nevertheless, the Commissioner is an internet compliant Commissioner. He will be able to access this platform and he will go through your questions. And also for those of you who have not been able to get us on Facebook, this program was also running. It's also running on JamesIbechi.com YouTube platform, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are not conversant with this, after now, the full excerpt of this interview will be published on James Ibechi and Ibechi.com platform. Thank you so much for joining. My name is James Ibechi. I'm with George Udoh. Thank you, George.
Thank you very much.